Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here, and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, today we are back with the end of our series, part 2 of our 2-part series, all about the top legal and tax tips for accountants and other advisors dealing with clients who might be leading into an exit or sale or perhaps an acquisition. And it's not necessarily for clients who are right there, right now. It's also about providing information for how to future plan and future proof your clients so that when they get to that point of acquisition or exit into the future, they're fully prepared. So, firstly, if you haven't listened to part 1, it might be helpful if you start off by listening to part 1. So all you have to do that is head back to your favourite podcast player and go to the episode that is just before this one. But if you've already listened to episode 1 or part 1 of this 2-part series and you're ready for part 2, well, what we'll be covering today here are the intricacies in working out the tax outcomes. We talk about the benefit of seeing advisors as part of a team. And then we also drill into the mistakes that accountants make in the sales and acquisitions area. So this is a really key one for anyone who is an accountant or an advisor in this space, because we're really drilling into mistakes that Peter and I have seen occur again and again over time. And of course, I haven't talked yet about who I have joining with me on this podcast. It is Peter Bembrick, who is a tax partner at HLB Mann Judd, Sydney. And if you'd like more information about Peter and his wealth of experience, of course, you'll get that in part 1. But sit back, relax, and here we go with part 2. And I guess, maybe if you could talk just briefly, you talked about some of the intricacies in working out the tax outcomes. Can you just point to some of the things, maybe even the mistakes that are made? Because I think, it's perhaps useful for us to focus on some of these areas where mistakes can be made. So accountants are aware of where the parameters are of perhaps where maybe they need to then extend outside of their organisation to get a bit more assistance?
Yeah, sure. No, that's a good point, Joanna. So, the most basic point as a starting point is that when we talk about a share sale being more effective, the 50%, even before you get to the small business concessions, the 50% CGT discount is so if you've got an individual shareholder or a family trust, which would have individual beneficiaries owning the shares. So by selling the shares, then that capital gain can be discounted by the 50% discount. So one example, the example I mentioned before, that has where they were able to achieve a fairly quick sale and a share sale following our discussions that we had with them. In fact, there were 2 business partners, one of whom was has assets that put him over the 6 million, so he wasn't going to be able to do much. But the other his other business partner would be under the 6 million, so he could have made use of the small business concession. So and fine, they would have done it to benefit one business partner, but even the one who didn't get the concessions could still use the 50% discount. So there was a benefit to him straight up. But then when you drill further and you look at the other partner, by making, so essentially you make $1 million sale, capital gain, you discount that by 50%, already it's down to 500,000. Now, if you could apply some of the small business concessions, that 500 can then go down to be reduced again, and applying different, so basically it can become tax free. If that same sale happened through by the company selling the business, say the goodwill for $1 million, well, you wouldn't get the 50% discount to start with, and you wouldn't be able to get quite the same. There's a certain element of CGT concession that could be claimed. You wouldn't get quite the same benefit. So it's obviously we could spend a lot more time going through the actual detail of examples, but that's the sort of, you've got to sit down and actually work through the numbers to see how much difference it can make. And but just being aware of those basic principles
Yeah.
And then there's it's probably a good time to highlight the changes. So there was these rules have been in place, as people would know, for quite a long time, quite a few years now. Last year, there were some changes legislated, which for share sales in particular, because there were a few perceived loopholes that the government could see people taking advantage of, and they've been closed out. So the rules have been tightened significantly. So essentially, it used to be possible in certain cases to sell out a stake in a larger business, and as long as, I guess, if you're a 1/3 owner in a business, for example, as long as your 1/3 interest was less than $6 million, then you could claim the concessions for that. Well, that's just one obvious example where they've tightened it to the point where, if you've got, I have had quite a few years ago an example where there were three people owning shares in a business that was worth almost 18 million, and so they each had to get to have a bite of the $6 million cap, and then so what seems like a very large business could actually get a tax-free outcome.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And they were very happy with that outcome, but that sort of outcome is no longer possible. So it looks to the underlying value of the business. It says the business itself needs to be under 6 million. So there's a couple of other areas that were tightened, but it was a particularly significant one. So I guess the message I would deliver there is be aware of the rules and everything you thought you knew about the rules. Have a close look at the changes that were brought in last year in relation to share sales, and they're still very effective, but there's a few more hurdles that need to be overcome to get the right outcome, which again just underlines even further the need for careful planning.
And I guess, you didn't say it, but I'll throw it in there for you. Obviously, part of the offering of HLB Mann Judd is to be there as a resource for accounting practices who are wanting to bolt on extra services and expertise that they don't have within their accounting practice. So I guess that's
that's exactly right, and we certainly have done that. I've done that for quite a few accountants, and it's the whole point is to supplement the work that they do. So certainly it's. One of the examples I mentioned earlier was where they decided not to go ahead with the share sale or to push for the share sale, and the accountant actually did a lot of the legwork in terms of putting together numbers and calculating what he believed to be the valuations, and so then it was a matter of working with him to we could do the whole thing, but it's a matter of working with him to work out what needed to be done. So it's supplementing his services, not taking anything over. So there's definitely no threat to the relationship. If anything, it enhances the relationship that the acccountants have with their clients.
And I think, this picks up on something else that I wanted to talk about, which is the benefit of seeing advisors as part of a team. So us taking a team approach in terms of working together with clients. So I think the accountants and lawyers working together can deliver, a really solid outcome when the relationship is close. And I have so many instances where accountants have the door open to having that a close relationship where we work together, we plan together for the clients, but also, we either in leading up to a deal or within a deal itself. And I guess, from the HLB Mann Judd perspective, it's about also seeing other accounting specialisations as being a bolt-on potentially as part of that team as well. And I think when this is all working smoothly together, everyone is in their area of specialisation and delivering the best end product to the client, but also having that ability of being able to talk within the team. Because sometimes, some questions that come up in a deal are not strictly legal or strictly accounting or strictly tax. There is actually the need for the interaction of, joint brainstorming and working through some of these areas together. And I absolutely think clients get a better outcome out of us combining partners in the deal rather than as it's sitting in our silos.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, as you say, Johnny, you need so that's exactly been our experience, and because there's so many different aspects to it. There's the transaction support from a legal perspective, which is obviously what you do a lot of. The general corporate advisory, as I focus on the tax. There's a valuation element to it. So with due diligence processes, there's often there needs to be, particularly when you're dealing with fairly sophisticated, depending on which side you're on, when you're dealing with fairly sophisticated parties, you definitely need that support to be able to deal with all the questions that they might have. There's valuation aspects, and we talk about doing a restructure. I mean, that's maybe not so much in an actual deal because the value is whatever the purchaser is prepared to pay for it. I suppose as long as it's subject to evaluating if it seems like a reasonable price that the client's happy with. But certainly when you're doing a restructure prior to a potential sale, you need to put a valuation on it that's going to stack up from an ATO perspective. So that's again something that needs to be looked at. You need to get someone needs to give an evaluation opinion on that. So that's sort of another aspect that needs to be covered off on.
All right. Well, then, and I guess that sort of leads in perhaps to one of the other areas that I really wanted to talk about, which is the mistake that I've seen accountants make in sales and also acquisitions. And maybe you might have some examples in this line, because I think it's really useful for us to be able to look back at things that we've seen that haven't quite gone right to give pointers for the future, but also to say, okay, well, here is a team. This is how we can foreshadow some of these issues and cross them off at the past before they occur. So maybe if we both throw in some of ours, and I'll kick it off. I've had a couple of examples that I've seen of clients who have actually done the right thing, gone into their accountant and let them know that they're looking at exit in the next sort of 3 to 5 years and wanting to get the right advice. And the accountants at that point, not number one, not working through the cash flow at the end of the day to be able to give them strong pointers on how it is that they should be looking to sell the business as they go and then start to talk to their corporate advisors or brokers. But also allowing, I've had one particular case that is really sticking out in mind. They involved a legal firm to help restructure the business and deal with some asset licensing issues and those sorts of things. But it was done by lawyers who don't have a lot of experience at exit. And I think one of the issues is if you're looping in other advisors at that point with the idea that this needs to be set up so that it works at exit, you need to deal with advisors who understand exit, because there's different things that can be important when you're looking at the ongoing running of the business versus when you're setting up for exit. So that's one of the things that I've noticed, the importance of dealing with advisors. I think that are specialists at exit and understand the exit space.
Yeah, absolutely, Johnny. I totally agree, and it's a matter of understanding what are they trying to achieve, what's really needed in any particular situation. And so I guess we would have probably seen similar things to you, and it's again probably another I guess a recent example that I've had is where it probably comes down to more that the approach that the client is looking to take with an acquisition. In this case it was a fairly large acquisition of which an operating company was part of it, and the lawyer, I think in that case the lawyer was definitely doing the right thing. It was a fair property, had a fair bit to do with it. So the property aspects was really what the lawyer was focusing on, and really was probably the one who was doing most of the work and knew what he did, right? So he was very clearly flagging, well, this is a tax issue. This is there was an operating company and in that case, in fact, the client, the vendor was very clear that they wanted the operating company acquired because there were things like enterprise agreements with staff, and there were sort of various things in place that they maybe lost some licenses, I think, as well. So they just thought it was to your point earlier about it's best if we just hand over the company as a whole and just somebody pick that up and run with it rather than taking everything out of that and putting it in a new entity. So the purchaser said, okay, fine, we're happy to look at that. But then with that, obviously then leads into more of a due diligence process. And the lawyer was dealing with all the stuff on the property, which had to have been done anyway. But the business side of it was certainly not his focus area. So he was doing what he could, but then, and I'm sure from a legal perspective, he knew a lot of the issues, but he was also flagging issues like tax and, is this if the client wants to know, well, if this is actually a financially viable business company, is this an appropriate value to be putting on this company? Those sort of things, and trying to get actually us involved, and the lawyer was really pushing for the client to say, well, you really need to reach out to HLB and get them to do more. But the client, I think, probably tried to handle a bit more themselves and just did it. And that wasn't the easiest process in terms of the two different parties, and so there was a lot of back and forth between the two parties, and the deal didn't really go ahead in the end. But it was, but I would suggest that we could have been more involved and could have helped a bit more with the tax and some of the financial aspects of it. But the client didn't really allow us to do that. Now I don't think that the deal wouldn't have happened anyway. That wasn't why the deal fell over, but it certainly could have helped. But these deals are quite, as you would know, transactions are quite complex, and so there's a lot of different aspects to it. But that's certainly where I feel that the things could have been done a little bit differently.
Yeah, and that working together element and everyone sitting in the right lane, I think, is it's a really good point. And I guess in that right lane element, one of the things that we've seen happen quite a few times is when accountants and other advisors try to run elements of the deal themselves that they don't fully understand. And I think the same comment applies to corporate advisors generally, if any of them are listening in. Sometimes, I can see risks really appearing, and certainly we have had a number of matters brought to us for deals that have completed, but after the event that perhaps didn't have the right involvement of lawyers and didn't have the right involvement at the right point.
Yes.
And I think when you've got accountants who feel, because I think one of the things is when you've been involved in quite a few deals, you do get the sense that you're understanding what's happening generally in a deal, and sometimes that can breed too much confidence.
Yes. No, I think you're absolutely right, Joanna. And I'd actually take that even from a tax point of view. I would take that even a step further and say like I would suggest that CGT, small business CGT, income tax are all areas that I'm pretty comfortable with. Fortunately, stamp duty, unless you're dealing with property, isn't too much of an issue these days, but that can be quite a very tricky area. And if you're dealing with property, that can still be quite a tricky area.
Or other states.
But exactly. But the point I was going to make was about GST, and so we've found that actually, as a firm, we haven't actually had an in-house GST expert. Like if you're at some firms, the big four would have their GST teams, and we haven't traditionally sort of done that, but we've in the last couple of years, we've been working with a GST specialist who isn't part of our office full time, but does work for us on a sort of a ad hoc basis, so that we've got someone who we can bring into a particular matter and basically present as part of our team. And we find that really helps us to we know him well enough, and he comes into our office at least once or twice a week and sits here, and so that when a transaction comes up like this, that particularly if it does involve property or cross-border issues or something else that's where there's a really tricky GST or even financial services, it's a financial transaction. So anything that has a particularly tricky GST element to it, I can think I know GST reasonably well, but I can talk to him, and I guarantee I'll learn something.
Yeah.
So and a lot of what he's about is not only illustrating the issues, but then I'm sure you could appreciate then saying, okay, well, this is how the transaction will go. But when you get to drawing up contracts, can you please send it to them? Because I'd like to have a look at them, because he's very much thinking, from all his experience in dealing with GST, he's very much thinking about, what are the warranties and things going to look like? How are you going to protect yourself in relation to GST in particular? And so we've got someone who basically thinks virtually just about the GST aspects, so we can tap into that expertise to supplement the other knowledge that we also have. So I find that sort of thing can be really handy.
That's a really good point, because I think many accountants probably feel like they're meant to know all the answers in some of these areas. Like, for example, GST, it's sort of like it's okay to not, you can't know, you can't be a specialist in everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. And I guess that, we've touched before on one of these other points, but I just want to make the point again. I think one of the mistakes that sometimes can be made in sales and acquisitions is particularly in acquisitions, is being too afraid of share purchases and creating a lost opportunity, or even just harder transitions and greater customer leakage by not being quick enough to embrace the possibility of full company purchases, share purchases, because I find many accountants are just, as I said earlier on, really sort of focused on this asset sale, business sale side of things. And I think that can be a bit limited sometimes. And the important thing is just to have a bit more of an open mind about it, but then also to bring in people who understand what it can look like, because it can be quite value destroying sometimes. Transition can be really hard sometimes.
Yeah. Just be aware. Just probably being aware too that especially when you're dealing with a relatively sophisticated purchaser in the sales situation, that from what I've seen in a lot of cases, they will have something like a tax consolidated group. So they will actually. It's pretty common from what I've seen that they won't actually use the company that they buy. The first thing they'll do, they'll buy the shares and they'll bring it into their group. And the very first thing they'll do is move all the employees to a new entity, or to their general. If they're merging the businesses, they'll move all the employees to their existing business operating entity anyway. So they basically will stop trading in that company and then pretty much wind it up. And so it's a bit more work for a purchaser to do, but it's is that particularly if they're one that has a record of acquisitions, it's probably not that difficult for them to do, and it's probably something they will do anyway. So if you raise that question about, well, would you be prepared to take on the company, and and if there's then you might find that it's actually not that big an issue for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and looking at from the sell side, being too scared to bring this up, or being talked out of it in terms of it perhaps killing a deal, can be really limiting, because we work with many acquirers who have absolutely no issues whatsoever in and are completely geared up for the share acquisition environment. So, all right, good. Well, I think that was mostly what I wanted to run through. In fact, there's one really important thing, and once again, we touched on this right in the beginning, but I think it's worth coming back to, and that's the mistake of not fully preparing their clients ahead of time. I just think that's such an important one, and I think it really needs to be focused on.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely, and because you just never know what's going to happen. So the better prepared they are, the better. And the easier the whole process will go.
Absolutely. All right. And was there anything else that you wanted to throw in there, Peter, that you feel like we haven't covered yet?
No, I think we've covered all the points that I had noted down. So I think that's plenty for people to think about.
Brilliant. Okay. And I guess the last point from us is a team approach. That's what we're all about. That's why we've put many of our accountant community events on. And of course, if you're not in Sydney, so you haven't been able to attend our events, then don't feel like you can't be part of the community. Go back and have a listen to the previous episode that we had where we were talking about the community for accountants as a whole, and get involved. Who knows, maybe we'll expand events outside of Sydney at some point. But also a lot of what we do and what we do here at Aspect Legal, I'm sure it's the same with you, Peter, at HLB Mann Judd, is about dealing with clients all throughout Australia and dealing with partners throughout Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. And look, that's right. We're not limited, and a lot of the time you're dealing with people remotely anyway. So it's just so it's really wherever the need is.
Lovely. Great. Okay. Well, look, Peter, I just want to say a massive thank you for coming on to our podcast today. Hopefully you, the listener, have enjoyed listening in. If you want to find more information about what HLB Mann Judd, Aspect Legal and National Australia Bank are creating together, then check out our show notes, and also go and have a listen to the previous episode, which we'll link to in our show notes. And Peter, if any accountants or indeed business clients would like to get in contact with you, how do they go about doing that?
Okay, well, yep, sure. No, thanks for having me along. It's a pleasure there. So we can contact me. My email address is, I think, will you put that in probably put the contact details in your show notes there,
Put
perhaps?
that all in our show notes.
Email me there. Perhaps it might be best if Joanna could put the contact details there, but phone or email, Joanna will have my direct line there. So look, please feel free to make contact.
Excellent. Well, that's it for our second part and our last part of our two-part series, all about the tax and legal tips for accountants and advisors in dealing with clients leading into an exit or an acquisition. I hope you found this two-part series useful. And of course, if you'd like more information about this topic, then just head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com or check out our show notes. And through those show notes and at our website, thedealroompodcast.com, you'll be able to find details of how to contact Peter or any of the rest of the team at HLB Mann Judd. And of course, you'll also find contact details for how to contact our legal eagles at Aspect Legal if you or your clients would like to discuss any legal aspects of sales or acquisitions. As we mentioned a number of times in this episode, this is all part of the Accounting Advisors community that is a joint partnership between Aspect Legal, HLB Mann Judd, and of course National Australia Bank. And if you're interested in finding out more about this Accountants Advisors community, then just check out the show notes because we also link through to a way for you to find out more about that. The whole idea of it is about creating a community that provides support for accountants in dealing with business clients and commercial, legal, accounting and banking issues. And that's it. I just wanted to say, as always, thanks again for listening into the Deal Room podcast. It's been our absolute pleasure having you on board. If you haven't subscribed, then go ahead, hit the subscribe button. What have you got to lose? And if you're already a subscriber and you feel so inclined, I'd be extremely appreciative if you'd leave us a review. All you have to do is hit the review button on your favourite podcast player. Well, that's again, thanks for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey and the Deal Room podcast, a podcast that is proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time. Aspect Legal has a number of great services that help businesses prepare for a sale or acquisition, to help them prepare in advance and to get transaction ready. We've also got a range of services to help guide businesses through the sale and acquisitions process. We work with clients both big and small and have different types of services depending on size and complexity. We provide a free consultation to discuss your proposed sale or acquisition. So see our show notes on how to book a time to speak with us, or head over to our website at aspectlegal.com.au.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.